Welcome to The Atypical View. I'm your host, Lauren Florio, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in autism, ADHD, and broader neurodiversity. As a fellow neurodivergent mind, I'm here to help us learn and spread awareness on all things mental health, as well as help us unlearn harmful stereotypes by providing psychoeducation rooted in research and lived experience rooted in my atypical view. The Atypical View is obviously this podcast, but it's also my private practice where I provide therapy to clients here in California with me and provide neurodiverse coaching to others worldwide. So, without further ado, let's jump into the Atypical View. Hello again, and welcome back. Today we're going to be exploring a topic that I brought up a couple episodes ago. So if you saw my Misdiagnosis in Women episode, then today we're going to be exploring how race and socioeconomic barriers impact neurodiversity in diagnosis. So I want to point out that the delay in this episode did not come due to a lack of importance of the topic. I have been wanting to add guests on to the podcast for a while, and I felt like this episode, in order to really be honored in the way that it deserves and the topic be honored in the way that it deserves, I felt like we needed a guest who could represent the experience of the topic. During our Atypical View segment today, we will introduce our very first guest. They will give their story, and this gives us the opportunity to expand the voices that we hear in the neurodiverse community and take this small and humble platform and expand its reach within our community. Let's go ahead and jump into the first segment, which is our psychoeducation segment for today. And hold on tight because we will be introducing our guest during our Atypical View segment right after. Now, again, it's not surprising to know and understand that just like our episode on women, this is not specific to neurodiverse diagnoses. These things tend to impact far greater than just neurodiversity. This topic goes beyond just mental health, but into physical health. For the sake of a podcast being about neurodiversity, that is going to be our center point today. We'll go ahead and get started with talking a little bit about what I mean when it comes to misdiagnosis due to race and socioeconomic backgrounds. For example, autism and ADHD are often discussed in terms of gender bias. But race and financial backgrounds add another critical layer to discuss. Just like I touched on in our Misdiagnosis in Women episode, there is a research bias in neurodiversity studies. So if you watched that episode, you heard me talk about how women are chronically left out of studies. So using autism and ADHD as an example, we can see that the research around these diagnoses mostly studied white children. Obviously, there are some issues that comes from this. One, this means that it leads to delayed and misdiagnoses in communities of color, all different backgrounds of non-white families. America is supposed to be a melting pot of a whole bunch of different backgrounds. Yet we chronically leave out people of color in research, which leads to real people every single day going without the healthcare that they deserve, the accommodations they may need, and even just an opportunity to know themselves better. So this comes with a higher rate of misdiagnosis. And frequently, people of color get labeled as having a behavioral or a conduct disorder rather than the correct neurodiverse diagnosis. Due to these decades of a lack of racial representation, this has shaped our diagnostic criteria around behaviors observed primarily in white children. As you can imagine, this has had a huge impact on how we see racial and ethnic groups, and we overlook and misunderstand their traits and symptoms. In my episode on women, I talked heavily about how autism is not different in men or women, but that because of the social expectations, women mask more and show up in a specific way that is different to men. And this has more to do with the social expectations and conditioning than it does to have to do with the specific type of autism. And by that same logic, we can understand that if someone is raised in a different culture than us, they will likely have a different presentation of the same symptoms. And this causes us to misdiagnose or overlook someone altogether simply because their cultural background influences how their neurodiversity symptoms show up in the world. And we don't have the criteria listed to be able to properly diagnose these people. With autism as an example, many Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous individuals experienced misdiagnosis or a delay in their diagnosis, causing a lot of these individuals to be late diagnosed autistics, as we see a lot of people getting diagnosed later in life because they have finally been able to have access to the correct information as we've just started to include different markers in research, meaning different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds, including women, including adults. This has changed the game for our criteria and allowed us to properly diagnose individuals who have gone without a diagnosis for their whole life. In different cultural backgrounds, we tend to see a greater stigma in those communities, meaning even those who may get diagnosed may need to cover and hide or may have parents who cover and hide this diagnosis due to the level of stigma against mental health in their community. My point in this is that noting this research gap is to recognize how it affects how our doctors, our psychiatrists, our therapists, our teachers, our peers, our families recognize neurodiverse traits today. And until we can make research equitable, we will continue to fail these different cultural backgrounds and racial groups. Beyond the research in the ethnic and racial groups, or the lack thereof of it, it's important to understand how socioeconomic backgrounds also impact someone's ability to get properly diagnosed. Now, I have these two in the same episode because there is a relevant connection, and being a person of color is directly correlated with earning less money on average. As of 2016, research shows that Hispanics earn 70 cents to the dollar that whites receive, where Blacks earn 59 cents for every dollar that whites receive. This is due to many, many, many reasons, but a big part of this is because of discrimination and oppression that has led to fewer opportunities and access to things like education, job opportunities, as well as not having generational wealth. Let's go ahead and pivot back to the role of access due to financial barriers. So quality healthcare absolutely plays a big role in receiving accurate diagnoses. There are a lot of really wonderful free and low-cost programs within the mental health world, but I've also worked for some of those. And unfortunately, what I've seen and what many peers of mine have seen is overworked and underpaid employees who don't have time to research new things, who don't have time to sit with a patient and really understand them, don't have time to really meet someone where they're at because they're given a absolutely insane caseload and huge, ridiculously long list of expectations to meet with each person. It's an impossible game of catch up. And so if people from a lower social status have to go to, one, fewer resources that are backed up, have long wait lists, or don't have insurance at all, have to pay out of pocket and can't afford evaluations, or even if they do get the evaluation, they can't afford the therapy or the follow-up. Even when free services exist, they tend to be located, the quality ones tend to be located in wealthier neighborhoods or again, have these long, ridiculous wait times and are incredibly backed up. And when you do finally get in, those workers are overworked. It is a systemic issue. And when your care is less qualified, you are going to have a worse outcome. It is my job to quite literally work with autistic people. Like that is like the center point of what I need to be good at. I need to be up to date on research and assessments. I need to make sure that I understand the late diagnosis experience because that's the clientele that I work with. And I have the right amount of clients that I can put energy and time into researching and staying up to date and making sure that I am being as ethical as I possibly can with my clients. That being said, I'm not saying every free program is run as poorly as the ones that I worked for were, but I will say a lot of them tend to be overworked and underpaid, and the ability to have free time to actually do personal research and further your education and dive into these things and read on these topics and really immerse yourself in something was pretty much minimum. I was so exhausted at the end of the day that I did not want to touch anything psychology, mental health related with a 10-foot pole. And when someone from a racial background who doesn't fit the white standard and someone from a financial status that can't afford more competent services, you get someone who is almost guaranteed to be given an incorrect diagnosis or missed altogether. It is not uncommon to not even go to see a therapist, a doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist when you're low income. So access to early screening programs and things like that is just already going to be limited, if at all. Okay. So I also think it's really important to talk about how the cultural differences do actually express the traits. So giving a little bit of information on cultural competence, right? Which unfortunately the medical system lacks both in physical healthcare and in mental health care. Cultural competence is so important, and we unfortunately don't do a great job of actually teaching these things to clinicians and medical practitioners. And on top of it, there is bias for programs that even do teach some of this, where unfortunately sometimes it's stereotyping or the person learning doesn't pay attention because they think it's irrelevant. I hate to say it, but it's true. There's racial biases, there's racism that is prevalent throughout this country that shows up in our healthcare professionals. Even if we take a code of ethics that say we won't, we have all seen it. I'm getting real heated this episode, so I'm going to take a nice little regulating breath. Okay, I can do this. Cultural differences. Yeah. Culture shapes how people express emotion, how we communicate, how we engage socially. In some cultures, for example, avoiding eye contact is a sign of respect, where in America, it tends to be a sign that that person may be autistic. There's also different expectations in different cultures. Someone who interrupts frequently, that may be a cue that they have an attention issue, right? That might be true, but in Italian households, which is how I grew up, you couldn't exist without talking over someone. There was 14 conversations going on at once. I'm not saying that was healthy, but that was the norm. Is there a possibility that every single person in my family might have had ADHD? Maybe. But my point is that it was far more culturally normal to talk over each other in that way. The point in this is that these cultural differences can cause professionals to miss key signs of neurodiversity or even interpret behaviors inaccurately. As you can imagine, this may cause families to hesitate to even seek diagnosis due to the discrimination that they may face or have faced in the past, or due to the stigma they may carry around mental health. So this is a good time to transition into the second segment of today's podcast, which is the atypical view. And normally this is where I talk about how I relate to today's content. But as I mentioned, today we will be inviting in our very first special guest to share their story instead. So I want to introduce our guest for today's episode. Sabrina is not only one of my dearest friends, but a fellow neurodivergent whose struggles with misdiagnosis falls right into the pattern mentioned today. I'm so grateful to have you here today, Sabrina. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Hello. I'm so stoked to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast, Lauren. I think what you're doing is so wonderful, and I feel like I've learned so much from you, not just by being your friend, but also by listening to your podcast. I think what you're doing is so great, and you're making information so accessible to people, and I'm so stoked to be a part of it. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate you, and I appreciate to hear that this is actually helping people better understand neurodiversity. But yeah, I have to thank you a million times because you have always been just like one of my number one supporters in my life, and having you in my support system means the world to me. So thank you again for being here. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and jump straight into the questions. You recently had a frustrating battle of trying to get appropriately diagnosed. But before we dive into that story, could you tell me a bit about how mental health was perceived in your home growing up?
Yeah, so the short answer is mental health was not perceived. Growing up, we just didn't really have any sort of conversations that were beyond the surface level. And I think that that can be for a number of reasons. I think that it can be cultural. I grew up in a Mexican American household. I think that it can also be generational, knowing who my grandparents are now. I'm not sure that they were having these conversations with my parents, and I'm sure my grandparents' parents were having conversations with them. I think it can go way back, and I also think that there were a ton of time constraints. My parents were spread way too thin. My dad was working all the time trying to, take care of 7 kids, and my mom was home all the time actually taking care of 7 kids, and it's a lot and it's draining. There's really no blame to be had or anything like that, but I think it's just we just didn't talk about it. Nobody knew about it. No, like it just was not a thing. And so much so that when I had my first mental health episode, I thought I was having some sort of medical episode. I thought I had something neurological going on. I was waking up in the middle of the night, violently shaking and hyperventilating. I thought I was having seizures. I was having these like intense muscle spasms. My limbs were flying in all different directions. And it was just really intense, and I was really freaked out, and I had no idea what was going on. I was waking up my parents in the middle of the night, and they were just kind of brushing me off, and I was just getting more and more scared because these episodes were getting worse and worse. And so finally, I think my mom got tired of me waking her up in the middle of the night. She took me to the doctors, and they ran a bunch of tests, and they didn't really know, or they didn't really find anything abnormal. And so that's when they first brought up anxiety, and they asked me if I had experienced like any sort of major trauma lately, or if I am going through any sort of major changes. And then that's when my mom told them that I was moving to college in 2 weeks. And they were like, that'll do it. And even then, they didn't really provide me with any help. They didn't like put me in contact with anybody. They just gave me muscle relaxers for my muscle spasms. And then they sent me off and they said, good luck in college. And then that was it. And then I went off to college and I developed some really bad habits to help ease my anxiety. And I mean, even my first run in with mental health help did not go the way that it should have.
Even in our even in our long-standing friendship, I had no idea that this was part of your story before you got to college. And it is such a disappointing yet unfortunately predictable tune that that could have been a turning point for potentially you starting therapy or learning more about your mental health, and the system failed you in that way, and I'm so sorry. And I want to comment on an earlier piece that you spoke about. I agree 100% that the purpose of sharing this is not to point a finger and blame, but part of that socioeconomic piece of today's episode is absolutely about when we're overworked, we're also dysregulated, and dysregulated people struggle to regulate the next generation essentially. We're not here to blame your family and what they did or didn't know, but instead to better understand the systemic issue that is aligned with this generational piece. We can't blame someone for not having access to something over the past generations. Do you feel your racial, cultural, or financial influences on your upbringing have impacted your ability to get the appropriate mental health care or even support throughout your life?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a number of things, right? And so previously I said that I think that one of the reasons why mental health wasn't really even a topic growing up is in part to our cultural background. My siblings and I, we grew up in a Mexican American household and we also grew up Catholic. Right there, there's already a bunch of topics that are off the table. So that includes sex, that includes being gay, that includes mental health. It includes any topics that are deep and complex, right? And not only that, but being Mexican, we are such a prideful culture. We take pride in our hard work ethic. We take pride in picking ourselves up by the bootstraps. We take pride in overcoming adversity. So when it comes time to ask for help and when it comes time to admit that you need help, there's a certain amount of shame and guilt that comes with being so prideful, right? And then on top of that, 100%, we had huge financial restraints. My parents had 7 kids, and my dad was the only one that was working at the time. So there probably wasn't that much room for extra help. So I don't blame my parents for not wanting to take me to the doctor so much because we probably just could not afford it. There's no judgments, there's no animosity because there was probably a lot of things going on in my childhood that I'm still not even aware of.
Thank you for sharing that because I do think that there's a lot of what you mentioned that adds to the mental health context. You're right, not being able to talk about your sexuality probably contributed to a lot of the anxiety and mental health portion of that of will my family accept me and all of those pieces as being a part of the LGBT in a Hispanic family. I definitely can relate to the 7 kids and one working parent piece. That level of we just did not have access to going to the doctor, having health care. It just wasn't on the table. So I can definitely relate to that and that sort of intense pridefulness of my Italian father. So I appreciate you sharing that because obviously I can relate, but I think a lot of people from a similar background would be able to relate to that as well. I think it's important to hear. As I mentioned earlier, you recently shared with me that you felt incredibly misunderstood in your recent attempt to get support with a psychiatrist. Could you tell me a bit about that experience and how it left you feeling?
Yeah, without getting too nitty gritty, I met with this guy to go over how to get the process started for ADHD testing, right? And long story short, by the end of it, he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. And I've only have ever been diagnosed with PTSD, right? The thing that kind of was the red flag was when he likened me to one of his previous patients who she came to him for the same thing, ADHD testing. And what she didn't disclose to him, though, was that she was previously diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And when he found out, he asked her about it, and she was like, oh, well, I just don't really believe in that diagnosis. So I want to get seen for ADHD. And he compared us, which I don't think was a fair comparison because I've never once been diagnosed with anything like that. So that should have been like my like, oh, this is not going to work out. But for whatever reason, I just honestly took what he said for face value because he is a licensed professional and he was likening a lot of the things that I was telling him to bipolar disorder symptoms. I just didn't really know any better. I accepted the diagnosis and I accepted the prescription of Abilify, which I mean, Lauren, the side effects of Abilify, they're terrible. And for those of you who are listening that don't know, I urge you to look it up.
So, some context for the listeners of what Sabrina is saying. Obviously, pretty much all meds have the risk of having side effects, but Abilify does have some pretty common ones like nausea and vomiting, constipation, a lot of GI stuff, headaches, insomnia, like not being able to sleep. Honestly, the list goes on, but I wanted to add for bipolar, for example, taking bipolar medications when you do not have them can cause new symptoms like cognitive issues, metabolic issues, like sleep and restlessness issues, emotional flattening or agitation. There's there's so many different things that can go wrong and these can happen for months or years after you discontinue in some cases. The point of sharing this is because to try to find a diagnosis through medication trial goes against our duty as healthcare providers to not do harm. So I will pause there in my rant and give the mic back to Sabrina.
So after my diagnosis, I went to my friends because I was just feeling really confused and really blindsided. And I just feel like it wasn't me. And a lot of the things that he was saying, I feel like those are just coincidental to like what I was going through, that this isn't actually a product of bipolar disorder. It's just what I was going through at the time. But thankfully, I have a really good support system comprised of Lauren and one of our other good friends, Tiana. And they've known me for years, and not once have they ever suspected me of being bipolar. They really helped me come to the conclusion that I was misdiagnosed, and they really urged me to get a second opinion. So I'm in the process of getting a second opinion, but I'm really, really grateful for them because I don't know where I would be right now. Honestly, I would probably be on Abilify and I would probably be very miserable. So thank you so much to you both.
I want to also add that bipolar is technically a neurodiverse diagnosis, and there's nothing wrong with having bipolar, but being misdiagnosed causes new problems and results in not getting support for your active situation. I also want to say that I didn't go in guns blazing saying that practitioner is wrong. All I did was provide some resources and explain how that criteria is formed and helped Sabrina basically take that information and make a conclusion for herself on whether or not she wanted a second opinion, because obviously I didn't diagnose her. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. As I mentioned in today's episode, culture can absolutely influence how we present symptoms of our diagnosis. How do you think your Hispanic culture has influenced or contributed to being misdiagnosed?
I think that in the past, it has been a problem and it has prevented me from getting quality care. I'm not too sure that in this instance with this psychiatrist, that my culture affected my ability to be properly diagnosed. He did state that he specializes in minority mental health. It didn't really pop up, but I do want to talk about the time that it did. So years ago, I had a therapist and we were talking about my childhood traumas, and not to go too deeply into it, but she asked me why I never told anybody in my family. And I mentioned to her that I didn't want to break up the family unit. I wanted to keep everybody together. I wanted to keep the peace, even if it meant doing it at the expense of myself. This guy, he's a beloved family member. I know it might not make sense to everybody, but I'm just not ready to do something like that. And I was explaining that to her, and she was like, well, yeah, because they can get you killed, right? And I said, huh? What? No, no, that's not what I was getting at all. I didn't want to make things awkward. You know, my family is like every other Mexican family. We will find any other reason, any and all reason to get together and throw a party and just to be together. We're very, very tight knit. And so
I just can't help but comment on the very blatant racism that you faced in a time where you were going to get support. That is so disappointing and obviously unethical in so many ways. Obviously, I know stuff like this happens, but it is so disappointing to hear, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you. Please continue.
she brought up some really harmful stereotypes about Mexican men and how violent they are and how prone they are to murder. And while, yes, I did suffer at the hands of a family member who was Mexican, that is not a stigma that I am going to enforce because it's not true. And especially in our current political climate where we know what's being said about Mexican men. And I'm not going to sit here and enforce that stereotype. And I'm also not going to sit here and have a therapist talk to me about how my family members are going to murder me for speaking up. That's just not true. And it was so incredibly uncomfortable. It was infuriating. She was not listening to me. She wasn't giving me the proper care that I needed. I do think that in that instance, my culture was used against me. And I'm just really glad that I never saw that therapist again.
Truly had to hold back just saying ew over and over and over because I really can't even process how disgusting that is. Just so infuriating. Also, incredibly grateful that you did not go back and that you knew that you deserved better in your supportive space. So, I know you are still in the process of finding the right provider to really hear you and get appropriately assessed. But if you were to get an ADHD diagnosis today and start a treatment tomorrow, how do you feel your life would change?
I am. I am in the process of finding a new psychiatrist, a new provider, and I'm hoping that in that process I'm able to get properly screened and properly diagnosed. I think with this last psychiatrist, he didn't really give me the opportunity to really explain what I've been feeling. He kind of just stopped me at not being able to focus and didn't really get to hear all of the other problems that I was experiencing. And instead, he just ended up asking me questions that were more geared towards bipolar disorder. But had I been given the space to explain everything that I was experiencing, I think it would have turned out a lot better. I would have had a way better outcome. In the event that I do get properly screened and diagnosed for ADHD, and I'm receiving some sort of care or like treatment, such as stimulants or specialized therapy, I feel like I I would be unstoppable. I feel like I would do a way better job at my job, and I would be able to take care of a lot of the things that I need to take care of at home. Right now, I just only have enough time to just do my job, and then when I get home, I don't necessarily take the best care of myself because I just feel so drained from the day. And that's not to say that like my job is too demanding or too hard. I do have a demanding job. I'm the director of a company, but I would love it. I love what I do. I wish I could do more of it, you know? But I also need the bandwidth to be able to take care of things at home. And I would just really like some help in juggling all of that. And so I'm really optimistic. I know that there's care out there for me. I need to come across the right provider.
With that in mind, where might you be today should you have grown up with your mental health being taken seriously in childhood?
Again, another good question. And I've actually thought about this question a lot. And when I used to think about this question when I was younger, in my early 20s, getting all this help, it used to piss me off thinking about this. I used to get so angry because I just didn't think that life needed to be this hard, right? I feel like I didn't need to struggle so much to get to where I am. I do think that eventually I would have gotten to where I am because I feel like this is the life that I am supposed to be living. I'm in my absolute dream job. I've always said that I wanted to be in this job. I have the best friends in the entire world, and I have the best family as well. I just really do not think that it should have been this hard to get here. I think with the proper care and the proper help, I would be able to give myself so much more grace, and I wouldn't be carrying around so much shame and guilt. It has made me the person that I am today. But if I'm just being honest, I feel like I could have been this person with a lot less shame and a lot less guilt and a lot less anger. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, I do know what you mean, and I have felt very similarly in my life of I would not want to change the painful pieces of my life that I've went through that meant that I had to change who I became because I like myself now and I like you now and I like who we've become. But I know that for both of us and for many other people out there, it did not have to be this hard. You know this already, but just a reminder that I love you and I'm grateful for you and I'm here for you any step during this process that you take. I need to try to intentionally not get too emotional. So I'll use this moment of strength that I'm holding on to transition into our final segment. This is our call to action segment. I would like to encourage our listeners today to follow Sabrina's story on her social media, which will be linked in the show notes or description below, depending on where you're watching. You can follow her on Instagram at Sabs with 4 A's. That's SAAAABS. And on TikTok at Sabron, SABRON 420.
Thank you, Lauren. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to take up some space on your podcast just to share a little bit about my story. And I really do hope that there are others out here that will relate to my experience, and they're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm an open book.
Sabrina, thank you so much for being here. Before I let you go, in the nature of our call to action segment, I just want to hand the mic to you and ask you if there's anything you would like to encourage our listeners to do or consider before we close out today.
Yeah, look, I know we are just getting hit with horrible news after horrible news after horrible news, and I know that it can be really overwhelming and really discouraging. But please, if you can, just donate to your local immigration assistance organizations. And if you can't donate, that's completely understandable. But please just keep on spreading the word and spreading information. As a collective, there's nothing that we can't do. Again, thank you so much, Lauren. This is a wonderful podcast and you're doing wonderful things here. And I'm just so happy to be a part of it.
Thank you for adding your voice into the mix and spreading education with your story. I genuinely really appreciate your perspective and your participation and time and energy that went into this. I know it's not easy to talk about such vulnerable things online, and I just really want to say thank you so much for your willingness to hopefully spread some of this awareness and improve people's perspective on neurodivergence. Before we close out, I really do want to second the importance of donating to our local immigration organizations. If you are a San Diego native like me, Border Angels is where I will be putting my donation today. So if you're not sure where to go, you can look them up. Personally, their mission statement very much so aligns with my mission statement with this podcast, which connects with advocacy and education and creating social consciousness. While my intention goes towards neurodivergence and mental health, theirs goes through the direct action to defend the rights of refugees. If you don't have the opportunity to put money towards these organizations, I would really encourage you to be mindful of your cultural and racial biases and stereotypes that you may hold and spread, and follow and listen to and seek out the voices of people who do not look like you. Seek out neurodiverse voices, seek out voices from cultures that are not your own. We learn so much when connecting with people who we are different than. And in many ways, we're not all that different after all. Thank you for listening today on this very important episode. And as a reminder, your mental health matters. Thanks for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it, subscribe, leave a comment or a review, or send it to someone who might benefit from the psychoeducation, or just need a little reminder that they are not alone. If you are interested in my coaching or therapy services, you can reach out to me directly and connect with me at theatypicalview.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and I hope we can stay connected.